Good morning. I hope your day is going really well so far. This is a session about quality, more than testing. That's me, just a few words about myself. I started working with FileMaker as what they refer to as a citizen developer with version 3.5. Took a lot of detours before I made it my profession and life, and every part of that detour sort of contributed to where I am now. I was an in-house developer. I worked with Happy Software on the vertical solution for quite some time, FileMaker based. Then from Happy Software moved into the corporate software world, where I worked with non-FileMaker teams in a 3,000 people corporation, which is a really interesting learning experience, but sort of rekindled my love for FileMaker, and then made the decision to do custom development and join Skeleton Key, where I'm now the COO. I really, really love Scrum and Agile methodologies, and you'll see that in this presentation here. Non-software related, it's really difficult to be here right now, because if you know anything about maple syrup, upstate New York, it's mapling season right now, and I cannot tap my trees. I have to wait until I'm home. Just a little hobby. Over there on the side, that's my wonderful family back in my home country, Germany. Related to this week, I suppose, too. I came to the States 13 years ago, and only this year I really got into American football and started beginning to understand a bit more. So I'm excited for this weekend. Anyway, all right. So title says quality is more than testing. Here it says quality versus testing. I really want to distinguish that because it's really not the same thing. And I asked ChatGPT, what is quality in software development? And then refined that a little bit and came to this definition, which I think is really interesting. Not because it's long and it sounds fancy, but it covers a lot of different areas. It's not just it works. It's not just it's fast. All the way down to like it needs to meet user expectations and provide a good user experience. So quality is really, broad, many-faceted part of our software life. And that's what I want to do here. So I in the earlier slide, I did a little bit of
was checking.
All good?
Worried that the sound is off, but I think you're good.
Okay. I worked in different fields. Worked for myself, worked in a small vertical, worked in the corporate world, and everywhere I picked up little bits and pieces that I think contribute to software. So this presentation really, I want to look at different parts of the software development cycle and tell you about little tidbits that contribute to quality along the way. Because testing usually happens at the end of some step in the development cycle. Quality, however, is determined at every single step along the path. So testing, really to distinguish that, again, testing should confirm quality at the end, but testing is not a tool to build quality. There's a really important difference, right? So we say our code is tested, our software is tested, that's one thing. But is quality built into that product? So ensuring quality requires many touch points. And the way I look at that, I don't know who was at the user story mapping session yesterday. If you were, you might hear a few things that I said there again. But it starts really before anybody touches FileMaker or any software project. You start the conversation with either a client or the in-house stakeholders, whoever you develop the software for. And you got to make sure that you're on the same path the entire way. And it's not that the path slowly diverges and you stop seeing each other and you just like shout across the fence like, are we still on the same path? Yeah, we are. Are we still on the same path? Yeah, sure we are. You need these touch points to make sure you're actually on the same path. And that's harder than it sounds. And this is what this presentation is about. It's like, let's find these touch points. They're easy to build in. How can we confirm that by the end of the software development, we deliver something that has no surprises anymore? We know what it does, and we know it'll meet expectations. Because then that's when we meet quality, right? Why does it matter? The earlier you build in quality, the less money you lose. That's really what it comes down to. So this graph is very true. Think about it. So don't get hung up on the terminology that they use in the bars, like requirements. It's not necessarily something you want to use in Agile, but in the discovery, like as you're finding out what you want to build, that's when it was cheapest to make mistakes. Make sure you actually are on the same page with who you're building the software for, because if you're not, you're starting out apart from the get-go, right? So that's where it's cheapest, easiest. Design architecture, making the early decisions, validate, because if you, again, start down the wrong path, it's more expensive. And just look at these X numbers, 3X, 7X, as time, money, whatever it is you want to do. But once we start coding something, it's built. If it's wrong, if it doesn't work, somebody has to go back in and fix it, right? It becomes more expensive. Testing. Maybe we build something and then waiting for somebody else to test it. Maybe they're working on something and it's a week until they come back and test it. And then go like, hey, this doesn't quite work. But in that week, you have moved on to something else entirely. So you come back, it's like, oh yeah, that doesn't work. Let me go fix that. Because that's a week ago. It takes you half an hour to really get back into that mindset of where you were. That's completely lost time. So the closer you bring these cycles together, the better. But even then, it takes more time. And once something is deployed in the customer's hand, then it gets even harder to fix. Whether that's a custom solution, whether that's a vertical solution, potentially there are data issues. If something really doesn't work, there's downtime, then that rightmost chart is off the charts, literally. And I alluded to that. There are interesting studies. I really tried to find the source. I know I read it in an Agile testing book at some point, so I can only sort of summarize it. I think it was Research in Motion, the makers of the BlackBerry, who did a study and said, if we test our stuff within 24 hours after it was built, then we have sort of a decent turnaround time. Anything after that, it goes exponentially up in terms of the time it needs for somebody to go back in and fix it. So compressing the development and testing cycle, review cycle is really important. And then ensuring that defects are avoided as early as possible is super critical. If somebody pays, if you find something later, if you charge the customer hourly, and it's hours that they have to pay. If they pay a fixed price, you're paying because you're putting tons of time that you can't use somewhere else. Somebody pays somewhere, right? So it's really important, and having those conversations with the client directly really helps. Saying, yeah, we're doing a lot of testing and we're confirming a lot of our assumptions here. And they say, that's a waste of time, you're not building software. It's like, yes, when you build a house, you do a sketch first, right? A rough outline, and then you do a more detailed plan. Then you do the interior designs. This all on paper first, so that you know what you're getting. Because you don't want to walk in your house and say, there's a one-story house, I wanted a three-story house. It just simply doesn't work. So remember this graph. That's really important. This is why a lot of this focus on early quality. So laying the foundation, and this is the biggest part of the foundation. Shared understanding. What does that mean? Whenever you say, are we on the same page? And then somebody will say, yeah. Catch yourself, stop right there. Because you don't know. Look at that cartoon over there, top left. Say, are we all on the same page? Do we all agree? And everybody says, yeah, we are. They're all thinking different things. And it happens to us all the time, whether we know it or not. There's no way for us to know. Unless we externalize what we're thinking somehow. So they draw it out on the chalkboard there and go, oh, hang on, we're not thinking the same thing here. We're actually thinking different things. So let's work on this and get actually on the same page, right? And then in the end, they are on the same page. They have the same shape up in their mind. And one of the tools that I really love for this is user story mapping. This is not the session about it, but if you're interested, I gave a session on that yesterday. There will be a recording. For me, it's one of the fastest, most powerful tools to actually build shared understanding with the client. It's super simple. You have these like post-it like cards, and you build a narrative flow. So like, I open my emails and then I do this, then I do this, then I do this. The client tells you what they're doing in their workflow, you map it out, then you build more details with these cards visually in front of the client. So if you mistype something, if you put something up that the client disagrees with, you immediately have that validation. Ideally, you actually do it together. They start putting up cards too. Did that just do? All right, all good. So it's a really, really fast tool to really have that strong initial foundation. The other thing it does, it keeps the user goal in focus. Like as developers, sometimes we can go in the technical world and go like, oh, we could do this, we could do this. It's really about the user stories. Like I want to achieve this, I want to do this. And it keeps the focus on that level, which ensures you can continue to have conversations with the client, with the users on their level that they understand. When you're talking about features and implementing things, you can say, we did this now. They can look at it and review. Again, if you want to know more, come see me afterwards, check out that other session, or just Google it. It's actually really simple. Jeff Patton is the author. You look up Jeff Patton and user story mapping. I actually have a link in there, so if you download the session materials, this is almost all you need. It's super simple, very powerful. The other tool or method I really, really like, cards, conversation, confirmation. We all, in some shape, some form or another, use sort of Kanban boards, and that's what I mean with cards, right? Maybe you have a task, but the idea of the CCC, the 3 Cs in Agile, is you have a card that summarizes a user story potentially. But that is just a reminder for the conversations you had around this. And when you have that conversation, you type up, like, as a user, I want to do this. While you're talking to the client, don't forget the confirmation. Repeat back a summary. It's really awkward at first. And you go, let me make sure I understood this right. I heard you say that you want to do this and this and this. And then the client says, like, no, that's not what I meant. Like, you missed something there. That's actually, like, important. Like, make that a habit, externally and internally, when you work with teammates, other developers. It's like, when you hand off work to somebody, it's like, this is what I'm looking for. It's like, we need this API integration because we want to pull the contacts down from HubSpot and then put them here, but we got to make sure that things stay in sync, whatever it is. When you hand it off, ask the person, can you please summarize back what you just heard, what we're looking for here? It helps you identify gaps before they go build it, and then you find the gap. It takes a minute to identify the gap in that conversation, and you avoid a lot of mistakes and a lot of hassle. And this is really powerful. So this 3 Cs in almost all conversations, the confirmation is such a powerful little tool. And if there's tons of documentation as well, none of this is stuff that I came up with. All of these are methods and tools that often come out of the Agile world a little way. So 3 Cs, that's difficult to say. Cards, conversation, confirmation. With those two, like when you build out that story map and confirm what you're hearing all the time, that immediately builds a strong foundation. Then you have the information. And once we have the information in discovery, notice we haven't touched FileMaker or anything yet, but that's your foundation for quality. If we don't get this right, then it's really difficult to ensure we continue to have a quality development process. But then from discovery, we transition over into planning when we transform that information into a development plan. That's when we maybe create the user stories. That's when we create the tasks, lay out like how are we actually going to build this piece of software. And there are 3 things that I want to look at: acceptance criteria, user stories, and prototyping. Those are 3 elements that have helped us at Skeleton really ensure quality along the way. So the first one here, acceptance criteria. They define what the customer will see to approve the work is being complete. It's not from a developer perspective necessarily. It can be, there can be a technical requirement, but it's really like a definition like, I have an example here, right? So demonstrate that the dashboard accurately shows the number of new subscriptions in the last 24 hours. Demonstrate that the dashboard accurately shows the number of unsubscribes in the last 24 hours, and demonstrate that a click on either metric will jump to the corresponding user list, right? So very simple in the way of, I can either say it works or it doesn't work. That's what you want to get to. You have an agreement with the clients, like that's what we're shooting for, right? And that's also information you can then pass on to the development team if that's separate from you. It's like, this is what we're looking for. So make sure that we build everything. There's a lot behind it, right? There might be an API integration. There might be interfaces behind it. There's all sorts of stuff behind it. And that's great. We can lay that out as a development item later. But this is our North Star for this particular element. So acceptance criteria are really powerful in the sense that they give a clear direction while providing a lot of freedom to the developers and the technical people to implement what needs to be implemented. But at the end, you can turn back around and go to the customers like, here, these are the criteria we agreed on. We have this number here, we have that number here. You can click on both of them and you get to that list. And there's very little to argue about. You really have what the user is looking for. Another plug, that book there, Ralph Jocham, the professional product owner, I think is probably one of the best product owner, project manager books that I've seen in a long time. It's really quite amazing. All right, user stories. I assume most of us are familiar with user stories. I also assume most of us make the same mistake. We forget the so that often. The user stories template that's evolved out of the agile world is, as a user, I want to do this so that I can achieve that. The so that gives you direction. Again, in this example here, as an admin, I want to have an audit trail of all record edits. Oftentimes we can stop right there. So that I can produce a weekly compliance report to the auditors and our business does not get shut down. That changes the story dramatically, right? Don't forget the so that, because it puts everything in context. So part of this is we're using these things over and over, but sometimes it's go back to it's like, what does it actually mean to say? So I think user stories are really powerful because it, again, describes functionality that is valuable to the user. It needs to be valuable. But the so that part is really the point that I want to drive home here. Because again, it ensures that we understand what we're trying to build. And if that is clear, the path for anybody working on this project, any decisions are so much easier to make along the way. Rather than saying like, build this, build this, build this. If you don't know why, then you make bad decisions along the way. In planning, again, paint a picture. I alluded to that analogy of building a house earlier, where you sketch things first. We have a conundrum as FileMaker developers that it's really easy to just get into FileMaker and start putting things together. Whether you want to or not, we're always committing to some degree to keep going in that same direction, or we have to rip stuff back out. So I really want to make the case and urge you, use some form of prototyping. Whatever tool that is, whether that's a whiteboard and you take pictures, just simply draw it up. It's like, if I put that portal over here, is that what you want? Or shall we put no, I don't want a portal. I just want to see the number. Like, those are the conversations you can have when you visualize it, because our clients oftentimes, like, we see what we are saying because we're imagining it. Our clients sometimes, or not sometimes, oftentimes, they're not software developers. Sometimes they just need to see in front of them. If that's a piece of paper, sketch it out, take a picture. That's the fastest way. The key is find a fast tool that works for you. I want to just show you real quick what I mean here. And I don't want to promote any particular product or anything, but we use Balsamiq just simply because it integrates nicely with Jira and it's like right there where we have it. But as an example, this is actually a screenshot from a product And if you want to have that same conversation with the client, want to have a portal down here. Yeah, right here. And then they go, no. I don't want to scroll down here, but I have a really wide screen. So let's put it over here. Obviously, that would be easy to change in FileMaker. That would not be a big deal, but you can have other conversations. My point is that building a portal in FileMaker, you might already think about related tables. You might start building relationships just simply so that you can draw a portal on the screen for the client, and you're halfway down development and commitment, and then you don't want to rip it back out. So we just keep going. If you take that moment up front and do something cheap, whatever it is, something that you can throw away. The intention of the prototype is to be thrown away. And if you throw away 4 prototypes because the client didn't like them, that is success because you didn't have to rip things out of FileMaker 4 times. I'm serious, like I see a lot of reactions like, let that sink in. A failure in the prototype, when you review it with the client, is a success. And you can sell it as success to the client. It's like, that's awesome that we know that this is not what you want because I spent 5 minutes on it. It really doesn't matter. Let's find out what you actually want. It's really quite valuable. Because you will find out at some point, right? Remember that chart. You might find out once it's deployed. That is not good. All right. Back to the presentation. All right, finally, we're beginning to develop. So everything until now, FileMaker stays closed. Part of FileMaker is all sort of prep work, whether that's teams, different people doing it, or whether that's you preparing your own work, doesn't really matter. It's like, do the upfront work to make sure you know what's going on. And then it keeps actually going. Like if it's a bigger project, you do these things in parallel, obviously. I'm not talking waterfall here, do everything up front, but for you, the work that's coming up, go through these motions, develop, and then continue to go through those prototyping, user story, acceptance criteria notions with the work that's upcoming. So don't get me wrong, I'm not promoting do this for the entire project up front, but do it for the next week, do it for the next 2 weeks. And then you have these 2 tracks moving in parallel. And once you start developing, you really have clarity on what needs to be developed. Couple of quick hits here. Shouldn't be a surprise, understand the goal. Acceptance criteria, user stories, user story mapping, all these tools are about understanding the goal. So as a developer, I really appreciate it when I know a little bit of context going into a project and somebody else might have been doing the discovery on. Oh, that was too far. Modular development. There was a whole session about it just now. Who was there? Did anybody go? I missed it, unfortunately, but I'm a big fan of it. I might dive into some of it in a second. Actually click the button. When you do the development and you're building functionality, I've seen it time and time again. I've done it. It's like the button is here, the script is linked up, and I built the script and I tested the script in the debugger and it all works. First thing somebody else has clicked the button, it's like nothing happens. Oh, I forgot to put the parameter on the button. Fine out. Click the button. Like literally put the developer head off to the side for a second and click the button. There's this concept of the cardboard developer, and shout out, I think John Sindelier did that as with record a video to test something like many dev months ago. That's the same idea. Cardboard developer is the idea of like put up this cardboard person there and demo your software to that person. You don't need to take somebody else's time at all. Demo it to, I don't know, the little animal you have on your table. Record a video because you will catch that oops moment that either the client will catch when you demo it or somebody else will see it. Again, think of that chart. It's a lot easier for you to catch it right after you did the development. It's going to take you a minute to go back and fix that issue, whereas it comes back to you a week, 2 weeks later, and then fix it. That is much more expensive. Yeah. So that idea of actually get out of the software, have another instance of FileMaker with the right user credentials. Don't do it in the admin. And I think I have this little tidbit there for you. So test instance. think I have a screenshot. I don't know. If not, come see me if you're interested. There's a tiny little terminal script you can use on a Mac to just open another instance of FileMaker. You don't need a second install or anything. You can have multiple, unlimited instances of FileMaker open on your Mac from the same install that all have different credentials. So you can have a development screen and you can have a tester screen simultaneously. So that's just a little bit of practice. And then in the end, actually confirm the acceptance criteria met. We talked about all these things up front. Before you hand it off, actually go back and look at the description again. Even if you stared at the thing, the task for 2 weeks, go back and say, by the end, you should be able to do this and this and this. Confirm it. Again, all in an effort to find what's wrong as early as possible so that we can move through and are confident about the next step. All right, I'm a big fan of modular development. The discussions, I'm not going to debate the pros and cons, but in the context of quality, I'm a huge fan of building testable scripts that you can test independently of everything else. Yeah, I think I have time. I can actually open FileMaker. It's very exciting. If I'm on the screen, you could even see what I was doing. There we go. All right, let's take the following scenario. I want to create an invoice PDF. Then I want to upload it to box.com. Then I want to get the link, put it in an HTML, email, and send it out. I could build all this in a monolithic script, really long. But obviously, this is a convenient example for the session. Not everything is as clear cut. But we can very, very easily break this down in extremely distinct elements. And I know what it takes to create a PDF. And I have my little create PDF script here. And it literally does nothing right now. It just returns an error. That's how I start. That's literally how I start sometimes. Then I have a test script. That is a throwaway script, just so I can test one particular element of a more complex process. So what that allows me to do, having a test script, I can actually build the parameters. If I need to pass in certain parameters into a script, I can build out the parameters, I can play with the parameters. I don't need to create the right file set. I don't need to step through 5 upstream scripts and then be able to actually go there. It could be super simple. I can run the script, and right now, it's going to tell me it's an invalid path, something is wrong. And simple thing here, for example, I know I am expecting a path for a PDF back, and I know I'm going to put it in a temporary path. So I know that I should be able to match a pattern count. So come up with a simple, straightforward test to test what you're getting back. And then you can be confident. Because if I go back to the main script here, I could even hand this off to 3 developers. I can say like, hey, I need to create a PDF. And I want to pass it in an invoice number, and what I expect back is a path to the temporary file. So I know what I'm getting back. Then I go to the next person. It's like, you get a file path, take this, upload this file to box.com, and what I want back from your script is a shareable link to download that document. It's completely modular, independent, can be worked on simultaneously. And I know what I'm giving, and I know what I'm getting. And then the last one is obviously, it's like, hey, I have a link to a downloadable document. Go create me an HTML email that I can then send out to the following email address. It's not a technical challenge. It's like how you think about it, how you build it up. But it makes what I consider dev testing much faster, much easier. I don't have to remember the whole thing. I don't have to step through it half an hour in the debugger. I can run my little test script and say, oh, that works great. For the API, I can say like, hey, I'm passing in a file to a PDF on my desktop for all I care. Does it upload to box.com? Yes or no? Right, it uploads. But the link I'm getting back is not shareable. I can't download it. So I need to work on my permissions up there. Whatever it is, this is really easy to test. And it can be done in many ways. All right. Back to the presentation. And I was saying earlier that in most cases, acceptance criteria are from the user perspective. This example is one of them where you can actually break down acceptance criteria into more technical pieces as well, where as a project manager, I could, as I just sort of virtually handed out this project, I said like, acceptance criteria for your part of the subscript is that it accepts a path as an input, and I receive back a shareable link that I can then download that document. That's a more technical, more dev team oriented acceptance criteria. But again, it provides that goal, right? So sometimes acceptance criteria can be used that way as well. All right. I went through these. All right, so click the button, talked about it, and real quick for the cardboard developer, some detail. The recording I think is really powerful. Look, whenever you use QuickTime, you do screen recordings, obviously. If you use Zoom or Teams, any of those tools can create recordings, and then it can be shared in some fashion as well. Sometimes they're great for documenting what you did. They're great for handoff as well. Like if you actually have somebody who needs to test it, throwing those videos in is a really fast way rather than writing everything out. So I think there's a lot of value in it, using that concept. Because A, you're going to catch your own mistakes, and B, it's much easier for the next person. And this is what I was thinking about. So this script up there, you can throw that in your terminal, and it'll just pop open a new instance of FileMaker. And I tried for this session to come up. You'll see it in the screenshot in my doc there. There's a little, if you put that in the script, in Automator, in the script editor on the Mac, you can actually create a little application that does that. But I was not able to create something that universally worked on all the Macs that I tested it with. And I didn't want to distribute low quality in a quality session. But this did work. And it works for every application, by the way. So if you have something where you wish you had multiple instances. But again, what it allows you to do is like you can have admin credentials on one side, full access credentials on the one app, and testing credentials on the other one. So that you can validate that whatever it is you want to do actually works. That the scripts have the proper permissions, whatever it is. Yeah, I said that before. When you're down in the weeds, when you're working on something for a long time, sometimes it's really simple to forget. You just want to get it done. You just want to get it sent off. Take that moment, make sure the acceptance criteria met, goes a long way. There was one time where I was working in a product team, and we had a real quality problem. Like almost half of the items that were done got returned from testing. We had to rework them because there was some issue. Nothing dramatic. It's just a giant waste of time. So we tried to come up with a solution, and we said, we're actually literally going to sign off on everything. So we were all in the office together at that point, and we had a physical Scrum board where we had Post-its for each item. And we said, when you're done, you're literally going up and you're signing your name on the Post-it before you put it in the testing column. Changed everything. It's so interesting because there's some physical act of like, oh, I'm done. No, it's like, I'm done and I'm actually handing off. Whatever you can build into your processes to encourage just that little bit of consciousness, it can make a huge difference, is my point. It's not because people hope that nobody would notice what they did. It's really obvious who did the work. It's not about that, but just that one little conscious act made a big difference. So I think you're beginning to see hopefully a little sort of trend here. None of this is really hard. There are lots of little tools, and I encourage you to sort of pick your own set. Even if you use one or two of these, I'm sure it's gonna have an impact. Quality should be built in, not tested in. This is really what it comes down to. Testing in the end should be a confirmation of the quality that we build along the way. And I also feel I jumped over something that I really want to make sure I cover. So let me just quick look. got so hung up on the so that I forgot to talk about invest. Invest is one of those other gems. When you prepare a development item, a user story, a task, whatever you call it, invest criteria come from the agile world. It's a really cool acronym because a story is ready for development when it meets those criteria. So this is before you develop it, getting it ready to that point. If it's independent, that means like you don't have to wait for something else. Like you can actually start working on it. It's independent enough. Negotiable, that's important for, I think, not so much an issue here, but negotiable basically means like, I'm telling you what we're trying to achieve, but I'm not micromanaging how you're going to do it. Because I trust that you can implement the best way that we do it. Right? So just the right amount of expectations, acceptance criteria. Valuable, make sure that we spend the time we're spending on something that's actually valuable to the project. That's sometimes harder to determine than we realize, but that's a constant process as well. And if you think about the whole concept of quality, you can say like, yes, we built this project and this is half of the project, but you build the least important, the least valuable things first, the client is going to be disappointed. So constantly thinking what is actually valuable. And if you don't know, then you got to find a way to find out with the client what's valuable to them. Right? Just because that is really important doesn't necessarily mean that. So there's a lot behind each of these letters. It's estimated. You got to have some level of idea of how long it's going to take to build it. Probably most of us quote our work to somebody. Or you have an internal development team, you want to spend the hours efficiently. And if you take estimate and value together, you get a pretty good ratio of like cost benefit, so you can make better decisions. Small enough is something that every team has to decide for themselves. What is a good size for a development item? Some people just want to say, just build that dashboard. And some people want to say like small enough means this number, and this number on the dashboard. You're going to find your own size that fits the team. And testable, that's what I just mentioned. Also with the testing scripts or the testing processes. If you build something that's really hard or impossible to test, it's difficult to confirm quality, and it's really easy for something to slip by and make it into production and then potentially cause an issue down the road. Coming up on the 40-minute mark, which is the target for this. So, in summary, start in the beginning. Discovery is really important. That's when we had the user story mapping, building shared understanding, the 3 C's, the cards, conversation, confirmation. Might feel awkward to repeat things back, but phrase it properly, and it's going to be really interesting to see how many misunderstandings you can avoid from the get-go. Put some time into the planning process. Again, imagine you're building a house. You don't want to start putting the walls together before you have a good plan of what's to come and run out of budget before you build the upstairs bathroom or something. So acceptance criteria are really powerful. User stories with the so that and the invest criteria, I think, set everybody up on for successful development process. Prototyping is a really cheap and easy way to eliminate any kind of misunderstandings. And then in development, we just went through those simple practices that you can use to ensure. But that's all I had to share. Now we can have a little bit of a conversation. So thank you all.
So when it comes to prototyping, what I'm finding is that some clients like trying to prototype, trying to mock everything up, make sure everything looks good. And then they give the thumbs up to start development. But then all of a sudden, that's when they actually start analyzing and say, oh, no, actually, I want it to be over here. Or actually, I want this dropdown to have this. And so how do you make sure that they are actually approving it? Or is that just going to happen inherently of just like, well, we want to move this around? Because I just feel like sometimes, again, as great as it is prototyping, they really don't see it as true until we're actually...
Yeah. Real quick, if you want to leave, please feel free to get up and leave. And everybody who wants to stay. Just want to make that clear. There is another practice that I didn't cover here that we're beginning to use, where we increasingly refine the level of prototyping. And in a tool like Balsamiq, you can actually make it clickable. There's a practice that you could look into is monitored usability testing, which is really interesting, where you put together a clickable prototype and you put it in front of the user, and there's a certain script to it where you literally go, here, you're trying to achieve this. So now find your way through the software. I'm going to be silent while you do that, but please narrate what you're thinking as you're going through. It's quite interesting to see what comes out, because again, like that's the next level. Like we're trying to do it as cheaply as possible, as early as possible, right? And if that's something you find, like that's another method you can sort of stack on top. You have a prototype, you know you're in the right direction. Remember that path I was talking about, right? Like we know we're on the same path here, but we might be diverging. So what's the next touch point? It could be monitored usability testing, but I think that also depends then on the size of the project, because you're spending more time. At some point, you're going to make the call, like, am I doing this in FileMaker? I think the key is building that touch point as early as you possibly can. Right? So, like, don't refine the layout or whatever it is. And it's like, hey, can I just run this by you? Or record a video and send it to them. It's like, this is what we have right now. But if you feel they actually need to get their hands on, another thing we do is more frequently now we have acceptance copies of the development version. So we use production data so they're familiar with that. We deploy to user acceptance copy. It's like, hey, we just built this feature, just go in, play with it, and get your hands on it, so that you do that. And you keep rolling with your development while they do that. But you'll always have the situation where it's like, oh, yeah, looks good, and then I didn't actually get their hands on it. So I think it's a client education thing, and that's hard.
Well, I really like the chart you showed before, and that's what I really want to educate my clients with is.
Yeah, they're going to pay at some point for it.
To follow on to the modular development part that you were showing earlier, a couple of things that you can also do that I find really helpful, and I try to teach my newer developers this, is two parts. The first one is pseudocode, right? Just a lot of commenting, and that might help to figure out where you're going to break up that script, right from the beginning. But I think the more important thing is, people like a lot of times error trapping becomes an afterthought. And often it's because, I tried it and it failed and now I got to go back and allow for that. But if you think about that stuff right up front and actually make it the first thing you put in your pseudocode, well, what about with this? What if there's no ID in the field? Do I, prep for that so I don't go to related records wrong, right? And et cetera, then, it gets you thinking in a mode that will really just cut off a lot of potential errors right out of the gate.
And when something does go wrong, you trap it in the right place. You know actually what happened. Yeah, this is a good point. Like we really have to say, as Garden here, we have what I consider a really good error trapping framework. So I actually literally forgot about this because it's so much of a habit right now for us. But yeah, absolutely.
Another piece of that is validation is a component of that error trapping. If you validate in the beginning, you save yourself a lot of time.
Like, am I getting the right parameters? Am I in the right context? All these things. Yes. Yeah.
I would be very interesting for error trapping.
I don't think it's out. It might be in some of the example files. So I have to look at where that is.
I've been very impressed with some error trapping that I've seen in other code.
Yeah.
And I would like to encourage more of that.
Yeah.
And like others have mentioned, that I try to do preventive measures where I can, and of course include error trapping. But it is not a habit for everyone. Yeah. And I think being able to standardize it would be very helpful.
As well as click the button, you're absolutely right. Click the cancel button. You get a custom dialogue. A number of times I press cancel and it carries on.
Yes. Yeah. I think, there are details here. It's like try to break it, right?
Yeah.
Put text in a number field. See what happens.
Fail loudly. Fail loudly.
Yeah.
So this is my first DEF CON or Engage, and so I'm interested in finding out if once you come to a sense of you're at nirvana, do you have a template file that you have all of the background kind of stuff you've been talking about already in the file? and then you just make a copy of that template and then you start wiring up and stuff. So are there some background things that you have always?
I guess there are as many answers to this as people in the room. I don't think anybody, I certainly don't think anybody ever reaches nirvana. There's always more to
Well,
learn.
okay, so that's exactly.
which is good. But yeah, we have a template file, and there's always debate. How much should that starter file actually contain versus it shouldn't?
Right.
But like, for example, our error trappings, a few little custom functions that we always use. So like that's something like with Skeleton Key, like I've only been there for 3 years, but Skeleton Key's been around for much longer. So there's like stuff in there from many developers that's been built over time. And every time we try to modify that, there's a heated debate, even in our team. It's like, should we add another custom function, or should we change how we pass parameters to JSON, for example, right? Like all these things. But I think it's whether you find something you like in example files or you develop your own practice. I think it's important then for you to say, I'm going to begin to set up my own standards, because you don't want to think about it every time you start something new or start a new module or whatever it is. So I think it's my recommendation would be put together your own sort of set of standards, steal from example files, from things you get here, and then build your own things on top of it. But keep it concise. Don't make it it shouldn't cover everything, because then you're going to pigeonhole yourself in a way that's not going to be helpful. All right?
I think the next time you do this, bold, understand the goal. Because a lot of times people start developing something, but they don't know where they're going. And when they get there, they don't understand what the customer wanted to get there.
Yeah, and that's like the acceptance criteria are the tool for that. Like 100%, it's so easy. It might actually be hard to write good acceptance criteria at first. But that's the tool. Like, we don't need technology. It's like bullet, like demonstrate that you can do this, demonstrate that you can do that, demonstrate that you can do that. And then you have a goal as a developer. Plus some context around it maybe, but I agree. Like, that's why it has an exclamation point. It's the only one. It's not bold, but it has an exclamation point.
Well, the reason I said that, a lot of times people think the goal is to collect data. But if it takes you longer to process something with the system than it did to do it by hand, you've missed the point.
Yeah. All right. There's no other session after this here, is there? Okay, so stick around. Again, if you want to take off, feel free to do so. Yeah.
I have a quick question. So do you have any protocols or any recommendations in case you didn't set like some of these up, and then you encounter issues and errors? Like, how do you take it from that step?
Like, if we didn't follow best practices, it's always hard. And believe me, this is the ideal scenario, and it's an organizational challenge where we want to walk that balance of, like, we make it best practices. We don't want to. So simple checklists are usually helpful. You know, it's like, so when you're done with development, that's no guarantee. Make sure that you go through this. We have to remind ourselves all the time. I have to remind myself all the time. Like, just a little while ago, I got lazy and stopped putting acceptance criteria on a few things. And I saw it immediately. I was like, I should be crystal clear. This, come on, go do this. I was like, no, I screwed up. It didn't. It just didn't work. So it's a constant effort. This is not something that you establish once and you go, all right, let's go do this. Like, it's a constant effort, just like all processes and practices in an organization. So I don't have the checklist, I think, is really the key.
What would you recommend on a environment where we have large developer team?
Yeah.
And we don't create software and deliver it, but we actually own the software and we iterate to it in a multi-year project. How do you trap, like in other development cycles, right, where you can create assertion errors? So if you refactor a function that's being referred to an old template that not necessarily users are actively using, you avoid breaking that functionality because someone refactored this function, and then like 6 months later, all of a sudden someone's clicking this button and it doesn't work, and then you guys are
It's hard. FM perception and FM comparison would be my answer. If you really want to dive deep into something, use those development tools. I don't know if you're familiar with them. But you could run they have the problem repair, for example, like it's broken script references. Do it before you refactor something, because in a system like that, you're going to have stuff that's broken, unreferenced, and all sorts of stuff. So you need a before status. You do your work, you run it again, you have your after status, and then you compare them. It's like, is there a new broken item on it now that wasn't on one? Because you introduced a new broken item. But there's nothing. Yeah, some other languages provide more tools. FileMaker, I think a lot of it is fairly manual. Other than those development tools, or if you want to, I mean, you can build complex regression test scripts, right, where you basically simulate a user. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to catch a lot of things where you trigger certain processes, and it's like, if I trigger this, it should, at the end, I should see this in that record. Right? You can do that. I've honestly never done it successfully. So in most cases, there was a manual effort. And I've worked on some big legacy systems that kept going and going and going. It's always, nobody touched that script. And when we actually had to, be super diligent about using those development tools to make sure we're not introducing anything broken.
Can you repeat
Sorry,
the
that
names
was
of the tools? The names of the tools I couldn't hear.
FM perception and FM comparison from Proofgeist. They had a vendor session just earlier, but they have a booth here, I think. Highly recommend them.
I was just going to add in response to, I think, the question that you asked, someone else earlier, about having an acceptance version for testing, for user acceptance testing. We maintain a 3-stack model. We have a production server, a dev server where we can tear things apart, break them and rebuild them safely. And then we have a staging server, and that's where all the UAT testing is done. Yep. So if we're making changes or adding things that are not major, we do that in staging, and then we can get a real quick turnaround. The UAT, we return the ticket, you go test it here. If it's good, it'll be in the next build, right? If we need to add a new module or rip apart the accounting or something, like, we do that in dev, and then we'll move it when we're finished to staging so that we don't interrupt or hold up future builds. And then there was something else you were just talking, the question you just asked, I had another answer for, but I went completely blank just now, and I have no idea what you asked. But talk to me later and tell me what your question was, and I'll tell you what my thought was. Oh, it was about the regression testing.
Yeah.
We have a build checklist whenever we do a new build, because we have, one system has 35 files in it. Not every file is in every build, right? So we have a build checklist, and there are certain processes that are mission critical, and they're on the checklist. After the build's complete, the person responsible for that cutover then has to actually run those processes as, on server side or however they're run. But what we find is that checklist gets longer as new things crop up, and we didn't realize, we didn't know that this thing over here in accounting was going to break something in payroll.
Yeah. And we had, going back to that, we had a regression checklist, very simple. We had it, but we also had a dedicated QA person. We had a big system, and before something big goes out, they literally had a checklist. I'm going to go through this and this and this process to make sure. Mm-hmm. And they just pulled this up. The Go and test language is a particular syntax that's fairly universal and might actually be used in some other automated testing frameworks that don't work on FileMaker. But it's basically the standardized syntax to describe, given we have a user that does this and that does this, and then we do this and then we do this, we expect this to happen. So you can write it down so anybody could pick it up and then perform the regression test. So if you have critical processes, you might want to start putting together a regression checklist. It's still going to be manual work. So